Yeah, I think it makes sense to start with Ohio State as we're determining how these teams can win the game because their path is pretty straightforward. I think all they got to do is just go out there with their same straightforward strategy of attacking downfield, exactly like we saw them against Tennessee and against Oregon earlier in the playoffs. In those two games, those first two playoff games, they threw 15 or more yards downfield 30% of the time. Now, that dropped to 12% against Texas. So you might wonder, like, is this just, was Ryan Day getting tight in a big spot like he did against Michigan late in the season? I don't think so, because when you go back and look at how Texas defended them, Texas just sold out to stop big plays and let Ohio State do whatever they wanted underneath. 70 or 65% of the time, Texas lined up in two high safety coverages outside the red zone against Ohio State. That's not just high for Texas, that's high for anybody. There were only 25 games across all of college football this season where a defense used a higher rate of two high coverages. So Texas basically scrapped their typical defense. Although they do tend to use two high at slightly higher rates than most teams. They're about 30% on the year, but they more than doubled that against Ohio State. So they went all out specifically to try to stop the deep ball, just make Ohio State dink and dunk down the field and have longer drives. They were willing to lose that way if they just didn't get beat by the deep ball. And it worked. I mean, Ohio State did what they needed to do to win, but Texas also accomplished their goal of eliminating big plays. So that's why you've probably heard this past week or so people talking about how Texas laid the blueprint for how to slow down Jeremiah Smith. And on one hand, yeah, they kind of did. They were succeeded in that. But Notre Dame's not going to follow that blueprint. I'm extremely confident in that because this is what Texas did in that game is basically the opposite of a Notre Dame defense. They've played the highest rate of man coverage this year. And with that comes a lot of cover one, which is single high coverage. In fact, Notre Dame they use two high coverage only 15% of the time this year. That's the fifth lowest rate. And it was never more than 29% in a game all season. So for them to replicate what Texas did against Ohio State, they would need to quadruple their rate of using two high coverages. You're not going to do that. I think there's two reasons why we can say with confidence they're not going to do that. Number one, football coaches rarely adjust to the opponent to that extreme. Coaches overwhelmingly would rather lose a game by doing what they do best and are comfortable with than risk dramatically changing. So I don't think we're going to see them do it just simply for that reason, just because that's the trend across football coaches at all levels of the sport. That's how they coach. They would rather just stick to what they know rather than try to make an extreme adjustment like that. The other reason, Notre Dame has a true freshman, Leonard Moore, at cornerback. You got a true freshman going up against Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith. That's already a tall task for him. He's played exactly 49 snaps in his career of two high coverages. So you would be asking a true freshman not only to go up against two of the best wide receivers in the country, but to do so in a coverage scheme that he has almost no experience in at the college football level. So that combination of things tells me that we're not going to see Notre Dame change what they do. They might increase their rate of two high coverage a little bit in certain spots when they're anticipating the deep ball, because obviously they use it. They still use it 15% of the time. It's not like it's not in their playbook, but they're not going to come out with a Texas game plan to try to take that away. So with that in mind, I think all Ohio State has to do is come out with the same plan of attack. If they got one-on-one coverages that Notre Dame is going to give them in this matchup, just throw downfield. You've got better receivers than Notre Dame has cornerbacks. It's that simple. They're going to make big plays, and they should cruise to an easy win if that's the case.
All right, so that's the keys for Ohio State to pull off the win and probably cover the spread if that ends up happening the way that you're planning on it. What do you think that Notre Dame must do then if they're going to somehow pull off this outright upset? What would they need to change or modify? Because certainly they're up against it with the way that you broke down Ohio State's edges.
I mean, the first thing that I would do is what I just said they're not going to do, and that's play a lot of too high coverage. I think if you do that, I think it's worth the risk. It's risky, obviously, to do something you've never done before. But in this particular matchup, I think that warrants it. So that's one thing that they could do. But like I said, the odds are overwhelming that they're not going to do that. So I'll lay out another scenario where they could play their usual defense and potentially still win the game. The first step is forcing turnovers, which is possible. Will Howard has turned the ball over at times this season. It's not a huge weakness of his game, but he has been turnover prone at times. And Notre Dame has a great secondary. They lead the country in ball hawk rate. They make a play on the ball 19% of the time. that's an extremely high rate just for any defense, but especially for a defense that plays the highest rate of man coverage. Typically, teams that play a lot of man coverage have a lower ball hawk rate just because of the style of play. If you're sticking in man coverage, you're turning your back to the quarterback at a much higher rate than if you're dropping in zone. So you're naturally going to make plays on the ball at a lower rate, unless you're Notre Dame, who somehow leads the nation in both man coverage rate and ball hawk rate. So what that tells us is that their rate of creating turnovers on defense, it's not fluky. This is a genuine skill that they have. So even if they stick in man coverage and they're going up against some dangerous receivers, it's still possible they create a couple turnovers, which could drastically swing momentum in the game, especially if it gives them, they return one for a pick six, or if it gives them great field position for an easy score. That is something that they could do to stick with their defensive game plan and still have a chance. But then the second step to that is they can't just create turnovers, because if they create a turnover, then go 3 and out, it doesn't really do much. They've got to control the ball on the ground, limit possessions in this game, keep it a lower scoring game so that they have a chance in the fourth quarter. And that's going to be challenging against this Ohio State defense, but it's possible. Notre Dame runs a lot of heavy formations, so they allow defenses to stack the box against them. Normally, that's a problem against Ohio State. They're allowing just 2.9 yards per attempt with a stacked box. That ranks 6th in the country. They're so good at it, primarily because of their safeties. Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom are so good at stepping up into the box and playing downhill that it's just really hard to play against them when it gets crowded, because they basically have those safeties who are linebackers when they step up into the box. They've got 2 of them, whereas most teams might have one good, strong safety who can do that. Ohio State safeties are interchangeable in terms of their ability to step up into the box like that. So that's why they've been so dominant in that area. But Notre Dame's running back, Jeremiah Love, leads the nation with a ridiculous 8.2 yards per attempt against a stacked box. So if anybody can run the ball with against a stacked box from Ohio State's defense, it's probably Notre Dame. So it's a narrow path to victory, but if they do those 2 things, if they get a couple timely turnovers and are able to capitalize on those mistakes, and if they're able to run the ball into Ohio State's stacked box and control the clock a little bit and just make this a shorter game, essentially, they'll have a chance.
Okay, so that's their chance, albeit a small one. Now here's the big moment. Here's the big reveal. Do you think that whatever they do could either provide them the opportunity to get the outright upset or cover the spread that currently is hovering around 8.5 points here, with a total on the game of 46 points? Do you have a prediction? What is your best bet on this one, whether it's a side or a total? Do you have a lean in both directions or a best bet in either?
Yeah, even though I think that path for Notre Dame's victory is a plausible one, I'm still taking Ohio State, and I'm laying the points at 8 points with the Buckeyes, because I just think that they have more ways to win this game. I mean, this could be a low scoring game and they could still cover that. It's like a 21-10 type of game. That's plausible. Maybe Notre Dame does control the ball on the ground a little bit, makes it a shorter game, but Ohio State still produces just 1 or 2 big plays, which is enough for them to, pull away. But then Ohio State might also just run them out of the building. If they get 4 or 5 big plays down the field, this game could get out of hand early and it could look like the Tennessee game or the Oregon game. So I think Ohio State has the ability to not only win, but potentially cover this spread in multiple different types of game flows. So that seems like the safe bet. But I do want to point out, even though I'm picking Ohio State and I think they're going to win easily, if that happens and Ohio State wins this game going away, there's going to be a chorus of people saying, same old Notre Dame doesn't belong. It's just like when they played Alabama in the playoffs. They lucked into playing Penn State, who had an easy path to the semis, and they lucked into getting Georgia's backup quarterback. And before that even happens, I just want to say it's not the case. This Notre Dame belongs here. This is the best team Notre Dame has had since the early 90s. Marcus Freeman has using NIL and using the portal has created the most talented roster Notre Dame's had in a really long time. So they belong here. This is a team that would normally be capable of winning a national championship, and they might if they had played Oregon or Texas, if Ohio State had lost before this point. But for the reasons that we've laid out today, Ohio State is kind of uniquely built to dismantle everything that Notre Dame does really well. It's just a terrible matchup. It's just some bad luck for Notre Dame that they just ran into this juggernaut of Ohio State, who's perfectly designed to beat them. So I think that Notre Dame belongs, but I do think Ohio State covers the points and wins easily.